Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us. My name is Megan, and I'm a creative collaborator with Jaded Culture. And we are chatting today with Lee Ho, a registered social worker who, through her counseling work, has a deep commitment to serving and providing advocacy and capacity building to marginalized communities experiencing mental health challenges. So, Lee, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to talk to you and just learn more about your work in the health and wellness space and how we as young creatives can better navigate and support our overall health and wellness journey, whether that be on our own in the online virtual space or with the help of a registered practitioner. So if you're ready, we'll just jump right into the questions.
Thank you for the lovely introduction, Megan. It's a pleasure and an honor to actually speak with you today. So yeah, I'm actually looking forward to it.
Awesome. Okay, so let's just chat a little bit first about your personal practice. So I know you utilize strengths-based approaches, which are heavily guided by some key principles that kind of outline a person's experience with the world, really. And so I would love if you can just share a little bit more about the principles that guide your approach and how they kind of how these approaches really serve the needs of young folks.
For sure. So the strengths-based theory or approach is it's an ideology. So it's kind of a perspective that a lot of social workers use in their practice. And to be quite honest, it's actually an approach that I think anybody can kind of adopt in the work that they're doing. I think it's one of my favorites because it really highlights the person's strengths and self-determination. So there's a belief that the person or the client is the expert of themselves. So I think they have a lot to offer. They have their own stories. The therapeutic process is collaborative, and it kind of hones in on a person's capabilities. There's transparency, and it recognizes that the client or the person has an inherent wisdom about their own experiences. So, I mean, you can even use it in like, friendships or, the work that you're doing or whatever it may be. And I think it's a really helpful perspective to kind of, take away from. I think it's why it works actually is that the individual believes that they can become an agent of change. So whether it's within themselves and their lives, their families, their communities, within the organizations, they actually feel like they have choice in the matter. And with that shared piece of it, that commitment then becomes more meaningful with greater positive outcomes.
Absolutely. I was just like heavily shaking my head to all of that because I fully agree with what you're saying. And kind of in your experience as a social worker, what kind of experience do you have with young adults, especially those in the creative and entertainment industries, kind of navigating wellness? Like, what is unique about the mental health of young people or about creatives?
I think I guess what makes creatives and young people quite unique is that they have their idea of change and the component of change intertwined with their identity and it transforming into something else. I feel like I'll use adolescence as an example where, people watch the becoming of age, where, you're developing habits, and habits to be learned would be, including physical, emotional, and social. Examples of that would being like, sleep and nutrition. How are you in your childhood now learning the skills to do that in an appropriate way where you're growing and being autonomous, right? So coping skills would be a part of that, interpersonal skills. Your identity changes, relationships change. And I feel like there's a lot of external factors in play here, such as social media, peer relationships, drug use, sex.
Yes.
And how do we now adopt an identity with all these changes in our identity transforming so that we can grow and become these more autonomous individuals, whether it be in the work that we do in the field or as a self-sufficient adult. So I think that is sort of common. And I think any aspect of life where there is change or transformation, that we are now individuals enduring a lot of change, right? And in times of change, oftentimes we do need a lot more support than we actually believe we do.
1,000%. And exactly kind of speaking and building off of that, like when when we're living through all of these changes, it's sometimes hard to notice when a certain aspect of our mental health or wellness is being neglected. So what are the main kind of questions we should be asking ourselves to make sure we're in a mental or a healthy mental state?
Yeah, I think what's sort of really important for all populations is areas like sleep, your appetite, your moods, the things that you've used to seek pleasure in. Are you keeping connections? Are you being connected with your people? Are you isolating? You
Yes.
know, and I think that those are really key points for us to kind of be aware of when we're experiencing change and how often that's changing for us or the frequency of it, or is it impacting our livelihood or our functioning?
I love that. So how often should we kind of be checking in with ourselves, or how can we check in with ourselves? What kind of signs should we look for that kind of this negative inner dialogue is happening, or what indicators?
I think we have to look at, for example, if you're someone who's overworking or working a lot, sleep might be an area that's neglected. You might be staying up late. You might be overworking. So you can then ask yourself, have I received quality of sleep in the past week? And you can change the frequency. It could be a week, it could be a month, several weeks. And then we're looking for patterns, right?
Yeah.
So have I been nourishing my body? Have I been eating, nutritious meals? Have I been eating on time? Have I not been eating? And how is this different from the last time I was feeling good about myself? Am I bothered by things that never bothered me before? Are my moods low? What are some things that are triggering me? So sometimes we can become irritable. We're not recognizing that, and then asking yourself, well, what's happening for me? Am I more easily irritated? Um, and things like hobbies, things that you used to have pleasure in doing. You can ask yourself, am I losing interest in these things? Do I not want to pick it up again? What are my energy levels like? Those are really important things to sort of ask yourself, because when we see patterns, then those patterns are sort of trying to tell us something.
Definitely. I think it's so important that we try to kind of check in with ourselves and identify those patterns. But I think for a lot of people, especially maybe lacking peer-to-peer connection right now, it might be hard for them to kind of identify. What advice do you have for people who then make the step to say, okay, I need some support, whether that be counseling or a therapist? What advice do you have for someone kind of starting off their journey to seek professional help?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think just piggybacking on my last thought as well is us being able to ask ourselves, how are we supporting our own needs? When those areas are being compromised, sleep, your physical health, eating, what do we need in those moments when we need support? And your question about, what advice do I have for someone who's seeking a therapist? I think that oftentimes when a lot of clients come to me, or when we do have an initial meet, is a lot of clients come with struggles, with challenges, with feelings of inadequacy, shame, confusing, I'm going to use air quotes, crazy, damaged, broken, all wanting to get support. And like, how do I do that? Being in the role that I am, and not pathologizing or blaming or further shaming the client, right? So I think it's really key in therapeutic relationship to find a good fit. And I say this because a lot of folks will ask, do clients prefer that their mental health practitioner look like them or their therapist look like them? And that may or may not be necessary. And I think it really all depends on the individual, right?
Really.
So we have to understand that, be mindful of that. I think a good fit, as well as someone who you feel like you can build rapport with, someone who's compassionate, is able to sort of walk beside you in your journey with, a non-judgmental stance, as well as someone who's able to reframe what it is that you're saying in your cognitive distortions or some of the challenges that you may have. So I think, and it's not always a good fit, and I do encourage folks to kind of have initial consults, maybe even go through with a first session and see how that goes. And if it doesn't work, then kind of keep an open mind that, hey, I could definitely try somebody else. It's not the be all end all. And I highly, highly encourage that.
Yes, do not give up after a 1-2 door is closed. That is key. I feel like you really gave concrete examples of how healing kind of is accessible to everyone. So maybe I will reframe this to ask, like, is that your belief in your practice that healing is accessible to everyone? Like, obviously acknowledging that, there is this decolonization of therapy that does have to happen, and in a lot of people's minds as well. A lot of racialized folks have maybe don't have exposure to modern forms of medicine, maybe are more reliant on traditional forms of medicine, or there's also just like a stigma in some communities about reaching out for mental health. So would just love to hear your thoughts about if you think self-healing and or healing in general and wellness is accessible for everyone.
That's a wonderful question. I do believe traditional ways of addressing wellness would be, maybe talk therapy and maybe medication. Although that might work for some folks, it may not work so well with others. And I think that when working with, I guess, the BIPOC community and racialized populations, is understanding that culture and context are really, really important because they kind of shape of who we are, very much so. So that when we're bringing when we talk about healing, we have to look at it as responding to those cultural and community components and the dynamics as well. And I look at healing as something that is done collectively. I think we think about healing, we can't really heal on our own. And sometimes when we think about, grief and struggle, we think that, oh my gosh, it's my personal grief and struggle. But also being able to recognize that, what shapes our suffering, what we actually feel individually may be systemic, so there might be some history or context behind that has also shaped why we're experiencing this suffering. So I believe healing is a shared process. And that it begins with defining suffering within the systems of oppression that we experience. And I'll give you an example, let's just say a newcomer, a person of color, coming to Canada and working, say, 3 jobs, right? They may be experiencing struggles, but having worked 3 jobs, putting food on the table, putting shelter over their heads, wonderful. They're able to meet their basic needs, but are they meeting their emotional needs? Is sort of not at the forefront of what they're experiencing. And that's not to negate that they're not struggling because they're working 3 jobs and able to feed themselves, right? So I think that context has a lot to do with it in terms of healing. I have worked with individuals in the past where, this individual's like, I'm doing therapy, I'm doing counseling, but I feel like my stress and my anxieties are still so present in my life. And little did we know, it was really like she was situated in a community that she didn't feel like she belonged, right? So she actually physically moved, and that sort of helped, I think, with a lot of her anxieties and stresses around feeling fit, like she has to fit in, or feeling like a place like she belonged. So it sort of alleviated a lot of some of the stresses that she was feeling. And I'm not saying that works for everybody, but it was actually really wonderful for her. So we do have to take into consideration our experiencing or what we're experiencing and whether or not it's created by our environments or our little ecosystems that we are a part of.
Amen. That is so true. Like you said, moving is not super possible for everyone, but what other kind of strategies or habits can people adopt really in their daily life that can, maybe if that's, coping mechanisms or habits or just techniques that will kind of teach them resilience in the long run? And what are some of these habits that people can kind of adopt? And do you think that adopting good habits, such as like having a consistent schedule every day, do you think that really helps with people's changing their mindset?
Absolutely. I believe in routines. I know sometimes it's challenging to adhere to, but I think routines kind of set the tone for us, right? They're predictable. We know what to expect. So, it'll be like surprises. And I think successful outcomes sort of rely on routines, and creating that for yourself as well. What works for you might not work for me, right? I will definitely touch on like some strategies, some really quick coping strategies that I'll kind of lump into one. A friend had taught me this a while back, the acronym of accepts. So the first one being activities, engaging in just fun. Like it doesn't have to earn you money. It doesn't really have to have a purpose. It's just plain old fun. Contributions, helping others, lending a helping hand and being able to connect with others in that way, or someone in need. Another C is choices, making choices to maybe nourish your body, getting enough sleep, physical body movement. Those are really good, important things. And along with choice are boundaries, adhering to them, and they could be really challenging. E for emotions, owning your emotions, owning your thoughts, and also honoring them. I think that's really important in terms of maintaining your own health. P for pushing away. Pushing away means it's also boundaries, taking a step back, knowing when you need a break and taking that break and honoring yourself. T being thoughts. So challenging all that negative self-talk or the negative narrative. That is actually really important as well. And the last one is S in the acronym of accepts is sensations, getting grounded, the physical, tangible things that ground you, whether it be breathing. I think breathing is a really important one. Deep breathing at that. Box breathing. I don't know if you've heard of that, where it's inhale, exhale, and you kind of make a shape of a box. Or you can actually do what I do with my nieces and nephews is that you open your hands and following the grooves of each finger, you inhale and exhale as you do that. So that's helping your nervous system as well. So those are kind of quick ones with really, really short and condensed version of some strategies.
I love those. I actually love the hand one because
It's also very visual. It's actually very
exactly.
visual, right? And
Yeah.
I think a lot of people struggle with the breathing, and I think that we don't notice it, but we don't breathe. Like we hold our breath, we kind of
Yeah.
freeze. And I actually did learn another one. I think my niece had taught me where you put your hand on one nostril and then you're breathing in through the other and then you're blowing out through your mouth. So that strategy is helpful because it slows everything down.
Yeah, exactly. Engaging the physical, I think, is so important in the
Yeah.
mental too, like you
Yeah.
mentioned. So, um, those are amazing tips and kind of to change the direction of this next question again, because you provided those great habits. If you want to expand at all about how any of those habits, especially the emotions and pushing away, taking a break, especially when we're talking about comparison culture, and you mentioned use of social media being a big influence on people's lives, especially creatives, when we're kind of counting on the use of social media for our businesses as well. So if you want to expand at all about how any of these habits kind of would help people deal with kind of comparison culture and oversaturation of just everything, information and media.
Yeah, so I actually really love this question, Megan. I think it's sort of unavoidable for us to naturally compare ourselves because we're human, and we kind of do that as an impulse, right? And it helps us relate to others. So by comparing ourselves, we're relating ourselves to others. So we constantly assess and we constantly judge, and it's kind of natural, like we force it, right? It's almost unnatural if you're not comparing per se. And I think that although it can be healthy, it can also be very detrimental to ourselves, especially if we're using, comparing ourselves to someone who's excelling at a higher rate or much better as a benchmark for us, right? And if you want to sort of visualize it, you can actually visualize an iceberg, right? The top of the iceberg, you're seeing, somebody with, I don't know, like 100K followers or whatever. And then at the bottom of the iceberg, it's that sacrifice, it's that hard work, it's the energy that they put into it, it's their failures, it's all of that at the bottom of the iceberg. So what you're actually seeing or what is on display is like, is it real or is that a trap? if you're using that as a benchmark, right?
Mhm.
And using that as a benchmark, and I say it could be detrimental because, you know, if you're someone who may not be feeling really good about yourself and you're using that as a benchmark, is that information, right? The value that you hold to it, is that meant to now diminish you? Or is that information, are you using that information to now grow yourself, enhance yourself? So I think it's more about your awareness in what is this information, what is the value of this information, and what is my relationship to this information, and
Yeah.
what value is it bringing to me?
How does it serve me? Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it does kind of, if we are constantly using it as a benchmark, and we're using that to kind of validate or invalidate ourselves and our self-worth and self-esteem, it sort of diminishes who we are, right? And sometimes it's not accurate. And I call it a trap because it's like, it's what you see. And I think social media is so good at doing that, that it's very easy for us to feel less about ourselves when we're seeing somebody, things are glamorized or things are so fantastic, right? And that sort of takes away from our individual experience, which is also very unique.
Amen. That's when you just want to like delete every app and just take a break, you know? Sometimes you got to do that.
Sometimes it is, but I mean, I love to challenge that. Like, it's almost like cancel culture, right? So it's about that accountability.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we can delete all those apps. Those are great strategies, but it's like, it's almost inevitable, because if you're not comparing yourself to that, you might be comparing yourself to someone who's walking down the street. So, you know, I would highly encourage just to be cognizant of what that thought is that you're thinking, right?
Because
And
also,
then
what are you doing when you re-download the app and like you're right back where you started?
exactly. So coming at it with, you know, critical lens and asking yourself those questions, I think are wonderful, because it helps you learn a little bit about yourself. And it also honors yourself and your own journey, and learning, like, that's not you. Maybe that's realistic for them, but maybe not you. And it really takes away from all of the things that an individual has worked towards, or, you know, what they've put out. So it's healthy, but it's also not. And I think perspective is key here, and learning about yourself in the process, like exactly what you had reiterated. How is this serving me?
I was going to ask you about how comparison culture and this negative self-talk or this trap kind of ties into our productivity, and how it kind of actually just leads us to not be motivated to do anything or to make any changes at all. And then we just get stuck in this cycle. So how do you, maybe in your work or just in general, like what are some motivators, or how can people start to actually shift their focus?
I think that's actually a really good part B question. I think motivation is one of those words where it's like, okay, the opposite of motivation is procrastination, right? And the opposite of procrastination is the doing, right? So motivation comes from action, from the actual doing. So you will be motivated if you actually do. And it's not like, hey, do everything. It's start some small, do something small, you know, open that laptop, make that design, or commit to 10 minutes, commit to 20 minutes, do it often. And the more you do it, the more you'll feel like you're motivated to do it, if that makes sense. And that's the only way to sort of become motivated, because the more you do, the more motivated you'll become. And I think it's also trying to cultivate a sense of identity and esteem and efficacy through the things that you're doing, you know, and honoring, like, hey, this is what I'm able to do, or this is, celebrate those little successes. And I think that's important as well. And kind of thinking about it as, how can I be proud of myself, or what am I doing in my own accomplishments, and feeling good about that without feedback, right? So if nobody gave me feedback, how am I feeling about my accomplishments or things that I've completed?
Mm.
And another way to kind of look at it is, am I okay with this? Is this success for me if I'm not posting it on Instagram or social media, right? Is it still a win for me? I
Yeah.
think that's really important, because if it's a win for you, it's a win, right? I think that's really important, and focusing on, you know, what we can do instead of what we should be doing. Yeah. So, and I think that the more that we continue to do that, versus, I guess the flip side is comparing yourself to other people and feeling awful about yourself, that actually increases the risk of depression, right? So really looking inward. And I think that motivational piece is really, really important, because sometimes it can become a vicious cycle where it's like, oh, you know, I don't want to go near it, I'm avoiding it. And the more we avoid it, the scarier it becomes, right? So I think starting the action is a good place to start.
Beautiful. I don't know if you want to jump right into kind of prioritizing self-care within a creative lifestyle and incorporating the pillars of wellness into your everyday practice.
I think with wellness, I tend to have to check in with myself, and that looks different depending on how busy I am, I suppose. And I think of being able to recognize when you need a break, because we all look at productivity as, plowing through the day and getting everything done on my to-do list, and sort of prioritizing to-do lists and understanding like, hey, I've only got 6 hours of my day left. Like, we're not going to tackle everything on this list. And being realistic about that, right? And trying to let go. And I think letting go of things that I can't accomplish within a time frame, for me personally, has been so huge. Or letting go of that control of, oh my God, I got to do everything in this day, is sort of one of the biggest learning curves for myself. That we can look at things as success or accomplishment and not having to do them in a way where it's like, right this moment, it needs to be done. And then it's exactly that, prioritizing my wellness in that aspect. And the accountability piece, like, am I going for my walk? Am I leaving my desk for lunch? Those are really important parts of wellness. They don't sound like it, but doing it over time makes a huge difference.
Totally. I think that's important for especially people who are in the creative industries right now. Kind of the economic uncertainty around the creative sector, I'm sure leads to, higher stress and just anxieties about their future. So our future, me not speaking like I am also relying on the government right now. I'm just kidding. But I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add here, because I feel like you totally touched on kind of the point.
Yeah. And I feel like sometimes, I guess maybe in a lot of like entrepreneurships and being a creative, I know that it's I guess it's freelance, because you're not doing the 9 to 5, right? And I think burnout is also quite common, right? Burnout, and the idea of being good enough, right? Like, what does that measure? Like, what tools are we using to measure that, right? Especially as a creative. And sometimes we do that, and we get so caught up in what we do that we forget our why. Like, why do we do the things that we do?
Mhm.
Or why do we believe in it, right? So how do we pull ourselves back when we're overworked, overstressed, feeling undervalued, or whatever you're producing is not getting the feedback that you're getting, right? And I think it goes back to the motivation piece, where sometimes for creatives and entrepreneurs, that creating more in a different way can be cathartic, right? So it gives you a sense of renewal, reconstructing your identity, and actually feeling like, wow, this is really refreshing. So I think that's the beautiful thing about being creative in an approach to propelling yourself to move forward, whether it be healing, whether it be in the work that you do, or your wellness journey. And I think that bit with motivation and moving forward, it actually serves as dopamine for us. So it's a natural antidepressant. So like, if you're feeling burnt out creating a design, step away from desk, do something else that's creative. And I think that when we promote self-expression, it increases our ability to make that mind-body connection as well. And it's something different. And sometimes that difference propels us to actually do more, not more in a better sense, but motivates us to be more creative, or, we get more ideas from writing.
Love. Do you use any kind of like creative or artistic methods as part of your practice?
In the past, I have actually used painting, drawing, playing, and music. So I've kind of incorporated that in self-expression. And I think the kids that I worked with loved it. I think because it's so outside of just formal learning or formal dialogue, that it gives them a way to express themselves creatively without sort of boundaries, and there's kind of no right or wrong. It was really empowering as well to them. I think with artistic expression and say like art therapy or art as a therapeutic process, and tapping into creativity, there's so many avenues to explore. Like I would love to explore like sculpture, physical movement, dance. Those are very therapeutic. I've had been told that, like singing to yourself in the mirror, like that's a wonderful practice. It's not specifically art, but I think it's a way where we are able to express ourselves that brings us back to ourselves.
For sure. I think there's so many kind of like mindfulness tips that people are suggesting. Like I scroll on TikTok, I'm always like saving things like, okay, let me try this breathing technique this time,
You know what? And I think I definitely will say this again. I feel like breathing is it's definitely something that we don't pay attention to. And like it's totally underrated. As much as it is overrated, it's so like talked about, it's really underrated, because what happens is that you're calming your parasympathetic nervous system. Like you're actually able to calm yourself down, especially with those breathing techniques that I had mentioned.
Yeah, just goes back to what you said before too, right? Like how much your body and mind is intertwined. Like you really need to engage both to, be one with yourself or check in with yourself. So I mean, do you believe in the oversaturation of kind of the wellness dialogue or culture that we're in? Is it overrated, or do you think that it kind of is a good thing? It's making us aware of more, mental illnesses or wellness practices, or is it a bad thing? Could it be detrimental? Like, does it lead to self-diagnosis or possibly diagnosing your friends?
I think all of that sort of encompasses, well, we gotta love social media, right? People get Googleitis, like we Google the things that we think we have,
Yes.
or, this idea,
WebMD.
yeah, or this idea that like I'm just going to have a bubble bath, or, and all my worries would go away. Like, I think that self-care is really important. And I think self-care encompasses so many things, and it can mean different things for different people. And it could be if that means paying a bill on time, adjusting your finances in a timely manner, that's self-care.
Yes.
Especially if financing and finances or adjusting finances is a challenge for you, or saving your money when you're looking to save. I think those components of self-care are often overlooked, because there's assumption that it's just like it's meditation, it's yoga, and although those are wonderful things, we have to take care of ourselves. And what that means for you and translates to you might not mean anything to me. I know a lot of people do the mani pedicures, like that's a form of self-care, right? And if that works for you, then that's wonderful. But it also means reinforcing boundaries, which becomes a challenge, right? And I think that in order to sort of honor ourselves in the moments that we are finding sort of challenge, in caring for ourselves, because we often are givers, we're lovers, that when we're overexerting ourselves, we often compromise who we are in being able to do that. So how are we taking a step back and addressing our needs, and holding space for other people?
I love that you talked about kind of what self-care looks like to everyone is so different. And if you could speak a little bit more about to what are the different pillars or determinants of our overall health and well-being, and how they all intersect to kind of affect our state of mental wellness. How are they all intertwined, and what do you wish that people really understood about how these things all affect us?
Yeah, so this is a wonderful, wonderful question. This could totally be a topic on its own. I think the World Health Organization describes our social determinants of health as sort of non-medical factors that influence health outcomes for us, right? And that can include, conditions where we learn, play, grow, live. that shape our lives in negative or positive ways. Like our levels of education, how much money we make, our job security, benefits, working conditions, our housing, our access to food, so food security, how we're accessing health, our community, inclusive practices, non-discriminatory practices, our gender, our age, our gender identity, our cultural identity, and our coping skills, right? These all shift and change with time. And I think that when we look at that, we look at how it interplays with our identity and who we are. And when we're in our roles, and I say when we wear our hats, like when you're at home, you might be a daughter, a mother, a sister. And then when you're at work, you're a colleague. So how are these things playing out for us within the different roles that we have in our lives that may add to our stresses, our oppressions, our anxieties? So when we look at, and I think it goes back to that example where, that newcomer who is accessing help, what is that going to look like for them? Language might be a barrier. They may not speak the language, or, they may not be able to navigate the systems in place where it's like, let's just say serve. Like, how does somebody navigate and access serve when they don't have the skills, or they don't have the skill sets, they don't speak the language? So, these are hindrances and barriers for us that may or may not play into our wellness. We may not think about it. I mean, like, I come with a lot of privilege, like I'm able-bodied, I have education, and I have to recognize that that's not the case for everybody. And being able to understand that, like, these things shape who we are and how we are going to access help or access healthcare, access mental health healthcare. So in examining that, and I use this again, like, everybody is different. Your lived experience and my lived experience is different. Maybe mental health or health, physical health. I know many cultures, physical health is not at the forefront of conversation. It's not addressed. It's not even talked about.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you have diabetes, I'll be fine. It's a slap on the wrist. I'm going to just keep eating whatever I want to eat. I'll be fine, and I think it's that piece of denial. I don't know if it's, lack of awareness. Even sometimes with awareness, there is that piece of shame. And, so there's a lot of complexities and nuances around that. But those are really key points to kind of think about when we think about our mental wellness and how we're able to access care, especially with stigma around what that looks like for people. What's like, oh, you're going to counseling? Or,
Yeah.
oh, you're taking a sick day, you're taking days off. Like, what are our ideas and ideologies around that?
Yeah, absolutely. Literally touched on my next question, which is like, why is it so important then for us to be sharing these experiences, these peer-to-peer connections and having these conversations? Like, I'm struggling to find a therapist, I'm struggling with this, and just being real and open with our struggles with one another. Like, how important is that to this collective wellness and collective healing, really?
I think it's extremely important. And I think that piece about stigma, talking about it, I think is such a wonderful place to start, within your own friend groups, within your workplaces, within your family, within, the community. And I think sometimes it makes it easier to share. I mean, I know a lot of people are quite comfortable in sharing, and some are not. And I think while there are a lot of benefits of having peer support, and peer groups like friends, that socio-emotional support, you feel like it's relatable, you're not alone, as well as feeling that, there's accountability, like my friends can call me out and say, hey, like something's not, like, you're not really yourself, like what's really going on. And I think that requires a lot of insight as well, like awareness around that. But I want to sort of distinguish, like, friends are friends, supports are supports. It's very different than, I guess, professional support, from a mental health professional, right? I'm not saying
Absolutely.
one is better than the other. Sometimes we do need a little bit more support, for myself, sometimes I need a therapist to hold space for me and just to validate me and understand where I'm coming from. I sometimes I get stuck in my own head, and that's sort of what makes us all human. And if you are actually even having conversation about, I think you should see somebody, or I'm thinking about seeing somebody, I think it's actually a wonderful place to start, looking deeper into yourself and learning a little bit about yourself. But yeah, I think the support is so key. How do I need to be supported, and how am I supporting others?
For sure. What other kind of areas of the wellness industry do you think young people can kind of explore or tap into to help with their overall health? If it's not finding a registered counselor or therapist, like, is it being physical? Is it making sure, you said, sleeping, eating properly? Like, what other things can people start to utilize in their everyday lives to kind of start their journey towards better mental wellness?
Yeah, I think for most people, that having an open mind, I think is important. And being able to like hold space for yourself and allowing yourself to be human. I think once again, like, we're very hard on ourselves, right? And whether we're down, we're feeling awful about ourselves, we're feeling grief. Sometimes we want ourselves to snap out of it, or we don't, like, what's going on, like, this is happening for way too long. Well, sometimes it's just being in the moment and experiencing that, right? And I think the more that we kind of hone in on things like a balanced diet, and when I say that is like focusing on really what you're putting in your body and nourishing your body. And I mean, sometimes you might need some guidance and seeing your family doctor, a dietitian, naturopath, but oftentimes I think eating, staying hydrated, as simple as that, fruits and vegetables, physical body movement, really, really important as well, on a regular basis. And I mentioned creative play, like being creative and playing without a purpose, like go
Yeah,
out and have fun,
that
right?
expectation of like your output.
Yeah. And also connecting with others, whether it be physical touch. I know that it's quite restrictive now.
Okay, we're allowed stage one. We're allowed.
you know, um, and that emotional connection, right? Because sometimes when we're feeling awful, we isolate, right? And the more we isolate, the more we want connection. So it's kind of ironic in a sense. And I think that we need to look at ourselves and understand, like, what is it that I need in the moment? Do I need to call a friend? And it can be vice versa. Check on that strong friend, call in on. I think that connection piece is important, especially in healing, because we don't heal alone. And I think bringing that to the forefront, I'm sort of going on a tangent here, but things that sort of trigger us, right? Like, we cannot operate on our own and say, hey, I'm healed, because if there's nobody there to trigger you, right? Like, you have to endure that experience for that, and being in those uncomfortable moments to be able to say, all right, this is what's happening for me right now. How am I navigating this? Right. And it's kind of putting this distance between you and your feelings in the moment, and identifying what you need. I think rest is a really huge one too. And I really, this is my favorite one, rest. And it's quality rest, and checking in with yourself, and, oversleeping, undersleeping. Those are two sort of extremes. It's just finding a balance. What's restful sleep for you? Um, and all of these things that I've sort of listed, it's sort of tapping into your body, and it helps us sort of from an overstimulated, overactive state to a balanced state, our physiological response. So these are things that we can do that may not require any kind of professional help. And that's a really good starting point. And then being open to the possibility of maybe talking to somebody else. and yeah, just allowing yourself not to like, hey, this is not working for me, this is awful. Well, if it's not working, hey, let's try something else. Maybe you could do it collectively with a friend, if it's helpful.
So
Yeah.
simple. You gave so many tangible examples that I hope people are, if not already using, then I hope they start to adopt. So Lee, thank you so, so much. I feel like we could literally go on for an hour longer, but yeah, we will connect again, and thank you.
Thank you, Megan. It was a true honor to be a part of your chat. Thank you for having me.